What is going on, Peep Squad? This is my review of Wandavison episode 4. Again, these episodes do not have titles, but that's a little bit weird. Anyway, so this is very much an expository episode. It kind of explains everything that's going on up until this point. I think I would have preferred it if maybe they, instead of just doing 3 whole episodes of just sitcom, if they put a little bit of expository scenes from the real world in with that towards the end, to maybe balance it out a little bit more instead of putting it all in one episode. Comment down below with what you think about that, whether you like it the way it is, or if you maybe kind of splice it out a little bit more. Anyway, let's get into the episode. So it begins with snapped people coming back, which places this around shortly after Endgame, which was about 2023. And so it's revealed that Monica Rambeau, who was last seen in Captain Marvel, was a little child in Captain Marvel. She was snapped away, and she was at the hospital with her mother at the time, who died of cancer during the 5-year period. And so in Endgame, we were kind of led to believe that everything coming back, it was a good thing, although this is kind of presented in a different light, which is a little interesting to see things from a different perspective. So anyway, everyone's coming back. It's really chaotic. It's interesting to see it from this angle. Anyway, so it's revealed in this episode also that her mom, Monica's mom, Maria, started SWORD in the early 2000s, which is a little interesting. We haven't heard about it yet at all in the MCU, but anyway, in this iteration, it stands for it's Sentient Weapons Observation Research Division, I believe is what it is, which is different because in the comics, I believe it's Sentient Worlds. I could be wrong, but it's more of a space thing in the comics, whereas this is definitely an Earth thing. They mention a little space thing, but I'll get to that in a second. But it's more Earth focused, at least in a sense. So she goes to the SWORD headquarters, which, based on the landscape, I would say it's Florida because it's kind of swampy and stuff. I would say it's definitely somewhere in Florida. She goes there, and she meets the new acting director. I don't remember his name. The acting director of SWORD, and he kind of talk about SWORD for a little bit. He talks about how there aren't any. She's the first one in 3 weeks since Endgame to check back in, and they mention something about like manned space exploration, which could lead into the Fantastic Four in the future. Speaking about the Fantastic Four, we did a podcast episode of the brand new podcast that just came out, talking about who we would like to see in the Fantastic Four, a bit of a fan cast. So if you want to check that out, Spotify link is in the description below. Anyway, so he talks about just kind of different missions and how she's the first one to check back in, and she's like, well, I want to come back, I want to go back to space. And she's like, well, no, protocol is that when people come back, they need to be grounded for a little while, which makes sense. But he says, we have a missing persons case in New Jersey, we want you to check it out. Originally it was just monitor the drone. That was her whole thing. She goes back there. She meets up with Jimmy Woo, who I'm not a huge fan of the Ant-Man movies, but in this I really like him. He's funny, and they meet up. I'm talking to the cops who apparently don't think that Westview exists. They're apparently from Eastview. Monica mentions possibly them having some kind of selective amnesia. My theory is that the people in the surrounding area, in Westview as well as everyone outside of Westview, Wanda kind of affected their memory, so they don't ask questions or don't go in there or anything. Monica sends a drone and it disappears. All the feed is gone. We later find out that was the drone that goes in episode 2 that we saw. They send the drone in, and then Monica goes in after the drone. She gets kind of sucked into it, and then 24 hours later, all of SWORD is around there, just kind of looking because they lost an agent, and that's kind of a big deal. In this next scene, we meet up with Dr. Darcy Lewis from the Thor movies. I don't remember her being this annoying in those movies. I'm not a huge fan of her in this. Maybe she was. It's been a very long time since I've seen those movies, so maybe she was always this annoying and I just didn't know. Anyway, she's doing some stuff, some research, and then she basically finds out that they're sending this dome thing is sending out television broadcast, and so they're watching it, and we see footage from previous episodes as well as new footage. So the theory going online is basically that there are like whole seasons of this show, of each show. So there was like, you know, we got an episode from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Well, the theory is that there's like whole seasons there's like a whole season of 50s, a whole season of 60s, and a whole season of 70s, and every 24 hours or something it switches over. We don't really know how long how long is spent in each time period. We're not really sure. So that happens. I believe what happens next, they start identifying the people in the dome, Westview. And what's interesting is they have New Jersey IDs for everybody except Agnes. And you'll notice that Dottie isn't on there yet. The thing is that we didn't meet Dottie until episode 2, which is the 60s period. And all the pictures on the board are from the 50s period. So I think them not including Dottie is a bit of a misdirect. I don't think that she is necessarily a bad guy. But we do see Agnes's picture on the wall and there's no ID. So that kind of further cements it that maybe Agnes is kind of up to some funny business. It's the part, I believe, after that where Jimmy and Darcy try to send in the radio broadcast, which we saw in episode 2. Although, it's a little different than what we saw because apparently the signal going out is being censored. So the one that what we saw in episode 2, that whole bit with the radio was cut out of the broadcast. Yeah, so it was just edited out entirely. Then they send in a man in a hazmat suit, and he's on like a rope. He's on like a wire, and they send him down through the wire. They send him down through the pipes, which is really stupid because Jimmy was like, "We don't know if this dome goes down. There's no reason to say it doesn't." He's like, "Well, there's no reason to say it does." Well, it was kind of dumb to think that, but he goes down, and what's just really interesting about this scene is that the wire that's attached to him turns into a jump rope, even when it's on the real side of the dome. Which I mentioned this last time, but when things change in the dome, they're permanently that way, even when they leave it. Because it was a wire going in, but then it was a jump rope coming out. So, whatever changes Wanda makes inside Westview are permanent, even when this sort of reality whole nonsense is over. The changes are permanent. So that'll be interesting to see what happens and how this is going to change the MCU going forward. Anyway, so we get to the part where she banishes the beekeeper because he went in a hazmat suit, but he came out. In the real world he was wearing a hazmat suit, but then in the Westview he changed, his reality was altered into him being a beekeeper, and Wanda just banishes him. We still don't know where he went, which is maybe a little bit concerning. He could have died. I don't know. But then we go to the 70s, and you see a little bit of that they're watching, and this is the part where she's giving birth. And the interesting thing about this is that we don't see Vision's conversation with Agnes and Herb, right? We only see inside with Wanda and Monica, which in this reality is named Geraldine for some reason. I don't know. So I'm not sure. Is it broadcasting everything from Wanda's POV, or because does that mean that? Because remember last week we saw the one scene with Jones and Dottie, and remember when the power went out? She's like, "Do these earrings make me look fat?" And the power went out. I was like, "Oh, thank God." Was that part of the broadcast or was it not? Because it's interesting because during the Monica and Geraldine scene, Vision's outside talking to Agnes and Herb, And this is the part where they let their guard down a little bit. Because remember, that's the one scene where Herb maybe spills the beans about what's going on, and if maybe Wanda was there, it would have been a little different. We don't know. So it's interesting to theorize about that. But we see where Geraldine went. Wanda just blew her out of the wall because she mentioned Ultron. And so, like I said before, Wanda has some control over what's going on, although I don't believe that she is in complete control. I believe that she's being manipulated by some force, whether that is the Grim Reaper or Mephisto, which is like the devil, or in the Marvel Universe, or it's something else entirely. We have yet to find out. But this scene is interesting and a little disturbing. Vision comes in, and for a second, the illusion is down. Oh, yeah. Before we get into the freaky part, the aspect ratio is 16:9, which is interesting because this is the first time in Westview that we have that aspect ratio, which means that maybe she's losing control a little bit. Because this is also the part where Vision is freaky. He has the massive hole in his head from Infinity War, right? And so, yeah. And she kind of fixes it. I'm like, oh, let's watch TV. And this is interesting because as soon as they sit down and watch TV, you watch Vision's eye line, he looks straight into the camera. So I'm beginning to think that this is interesting because this scene means to me that Vision is probably dead and he's just kind of a puppet, whereas everyone else is real and alive and they're just being kind of brainwashed, if that makes sense. But in this, Vision is some kind of puppet, but also he's able to have some kind of sentience because he's also kind of aware and he's kind of learning about what's really going on in Westview. And so him looking at the camera would mean, hey, he's kind of suspicious of what's going on, but also he might be dead. So I don't really know how that works and how that fits together. I'll probably learn later on at some point. But yeah, that's... Oh, the final scene with Geraldine. She gets flung through the wall, and she gets landed out. And again, she's in her 70s clothes. So all the changes that happen in Westview are permanent. And so she lands on the outside of the wall, and she's like, "It's all Wanda. It's Wanda," which I think is a misdirect. I do believe that there's some other forces at work here. And I think this is kind of a misdirect, although I do believe Wanda is at least partly responsible for what is going on. That's everything about this episode. Tell me what you think in the comments down below. Like I mentioned, you can check out our new podcast, Facebook, Instagram, not Pinterest, Patreon, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter as well. You can contact us on Twitter if you want. And I will see you next week. I believe we have a video coming out about the new Superman and Lois trailer, so keep an eye out for that. Make sure you're subscribed and ring the bell so you don't miss out on a single video. I will see you next week. Bye.